I'm going to be presenting some findings from one study that Emily and I recently had accepted into a special issue at Development Psychopathology in honor of Tom. It's being organized by Dishion and Dante Cicchetti. But before I dive in, I really want to resonate with what Erica led with as well, which is the experience of being a postdoc with Tom. One of my big takeaways, and there was ideas that I was exposed to, there were theories, and I was pushed in my thinking a lot, certainly. But one thing that stands out as really unique in my experience was his openness to having a conversation about a non-fully formed idea and the willingness to sit down and talk about it with colleagues, bring people in, and the exposure to that early stage of thinking and theory development was a really unique experience. And it's actually a challenging thing to do on the other side of the table. It's a bit vulnerable to come in with an idea that you're not even sure makes sense yet, and to discuss and to set aside your fear of evaluation. So that's something that really I think about a lot as I have progressed through my own career. One example of this that was the inspiration for this entire study was the Chautauqua that he organized in 2010, where the theme that I took away from it, one of them, and there were many, but a bunch of people got together, and it was this idea of just sharing ideas that we had. And I was more of an observer at this, but I was just taken away by, on one hand, the work we do in an intervention space occurs in a moment-to-moment or day-to-day time frame. That parents want to know, when my child does this thing, what should I do? How do I handle that? Or what are my goals on a daily basis? How much should I be praising? Or how do I set limits or monitor my children from day to day? But our long-term objectives are in this developmental time frame. Over years, we're trying to alter the trajectories. So we have these time scales that are happening in moments or days, and we're trying to change years and trajectories over time. Connecting those two time scales, that's the task we're faced with, right? So Erica's talking about a lot of these dynamic processes at a moment level, and they're so rich, and it's exactly where we're working. And the connecting across these time scales, I've thought about this ever since Chautauqua. It's bothered me. It has been intriguing to me. And so here's an attempt at it. Maybe not fully formed, although I guess it's been accepted for publication, so it's as formed as it's going to be for now. Okay. So a quick acknowledgement of my research environment. This is the Family Power Lab in current on the trees, but also I've had students now, some have graduated, so they get to leave, which I'm disappointed about. I've had wonderful colleagues, and we've had funding and support from Carl and Diane Fink, as well as the Social Science Research Institute at Penn State. So wonderful to have all those people. The theory that I've been drawn to and that I'll be talking about today is this premature adolescent autonomy, and it doesn't have as much attention as coercion theory, but to me as an adolescent researcher, it shines a light on developmental changes that can occur in adolescence where families that are otherwise doing quite well can have an inflection point. And so this theory, Tom and his colleagues in the early 2000s really laid out this idea that developmentally, particularly in the middle school years, we see declines normatively in families in terms of parents monitor a little less and they grant their adolescents more freedom. They're setting fewer limits. They're not as praising and warm as they used to be. So that's a normal process of reorganizing and acknowledging the autonomy in one's adolescent as they're becoming more capable and moving toward adulthood. And that's good. But what Tom pointed to was individual differences in the rate at which parents backed off. And there were some families that basically stopped. And they were no longer monitoring. It just plummeted in terms of their family management, whereas other families didn't. And the difference in the degree to which this developmental change occurred in family management accounted for a risk in engaging in a deviant peer context. And if adolescents engaged in a deviant peer context, they were at risk for engaging in substance use, risky sexual behavior, and antisocial behavior. So this is the developmental theory that I've been drawn to. And acknowledging the pillars of family management, I'm zooming in specifically on positive behavior support, the idea of using positive reinforcement, setting clear expectations, praising for good behavior, using rewards. This is typically the first family management strategy implemented over the course of like PMTO. It's a starting point in family checkup. These are foundational skills on which other family management skills are built. And they feel good to talk about, right? Praising kids feels good. The other piece that I believe factors into this premature autonomy process is the idea of feeling connected to one's caregivers. There's another literature that's emerging around the idea that adolescents who feel connected to their caregivers are more likely to seek advice from their parents. The alternative is their peers, and peers have bad advice, right? So we want adolescents asking their parents what to do when confronted with risky opportunities, and they spend more time with parents if they feel connected to them. They listen to the advice their parents give them. They may pretend not to, but secretly they do if they feel connected, right? So, I like my visual of like, if they are connected to caregivers, we can avoid this idea where they leave that bubble of safety and they are at risk for challenging social situations, unmitigated opportunities for risk, and deviant peer involvement, right? So this is what we don't want. We want them over here. Okay. So thinking on this time scale issue that's been plaguing me, this is micro time has been laid out. This is the moment to moment. Here's your state space grid. Looks a lot like Erica's did. Very cool. And then we have this developmental time, and it just feels really far away, these trajectories of change, and can we explain who's going to have this trajectory of risk or who won't? In the middle is a time scale that's gotten a lot less attention in this theoretical space, and this is mesotime, and I'm operationalizing that in terms of day-to-day processes. So here, instead of these dynamic systems or these kind of this degradation in family management, this is day-to-day variability in positive behavior support or connectedness. And so that's actually data from this sample because I needed a picture. Okay, so the question is there meaningful variability on a daily basis for positive behavior support and connectedness? And instead of turning to literature, which has nothing to offer on this question, here's a plot of our sample. This is day-to-day parent ratings of their positive behavior support. I would argue it is variable. So there are good days where parents are really praising and reinforcing, and there are bad days. And you can see some are kind of on the high end of the scale, but they move around. Others are really using the whole spectrum of how praising they can be. Not surprisingly, adolescents also exhibit variability in their feelings of connectedness to their caregivers from day to day. So they have good days and bad days as well. Okay. So the first research question we want to take on is in this daily time scale. Are daily variations in parents' use of positive behavior support, can that help us understand variation in this feeling of connectedness to caregivers? What we would hypothesize is, can we explain this variation in connectedness? So if that plot is connectedness with caregivers, might it be that on days when parents use more positive behavior support, they're kind of pushing that up in terms of increasing connectedness? So we want to see that connection there. That's what we're hypothesizing. To set you up for our idea here in a multi-level model framework, this could be thought of as a responsiveness to positive behavior support in terms of the response being how connected one feels. And so kind of extending between person analyses that look at average levels, so adolescents who live in families where they get a lot of praise tend to feel more connected. That's our rank order correlation. We do know that. What we know less about is this variability in these two, and might there be a within family connection or within family correlation that accounts for this variability. So this is what we're terming PBS responsiveness. That's foreshadowing. Okay. In research question 2, we want to know whether PBS responsiveness on a daily timescale may forecast developmental change on the developmental timescale. So there's very little guidance on how this might play out. So we came up with 2 competing hypotheses, which to me is very inspired by Tom. He loved competing hypotheses, and he loved kind of the great names. He's way better at that than I ever will be. But the first was a vantage sensitivity hypothesis drawn from evolutionary theory, which is building on differential susceptibility or biological susceptibility to context, or sensitivity context. Vantage sensitivity was termed to reflect how some individuals seem to gain more benefit from positive environments than others. So it's, instead of differential susceptibility being at greater risk in adverse environments, this was kind of extending it to the idea that there may be some individuals who gain more benefit from their positive enriched environments. So from this point of view, we would think that this within-person PBS responsiveness would be a predictor of positive outcomes, that they are gaining more benefit from parents' use of positive behavior support, and therefore long-term they're less likely to disengage from the family, engage with deviant peers, and do all the drugs and the bad behaviors. Thumbs up. The alternative hypothesis draws on research from affective dynamics, which have pointed to this idea of fragility. And this has typically been applied in the area of how one's positive affect may be highly affected by daily stressors. In this context, what we would expect is that high responsiveness may actually be a vulnerability factor in the sense that one's sense of connection and relationship to the parents is highly contingent or even reliant on parents' good days of positive behavior support. That they only feel connected if their parents are doing certain behaviors. So that would be indicative of a problem. Now, the fragility work has indicated that this is contingent on levels. So you might think that an adolescent who has stable, high connectedness to their caregivers, we think they're at low risk for disengaging. But if they are high in connectedness but also exhibit fragility, that puts them at relative risk to those that are stable and high in their sense of connectedness. However, if they are stable, when compared to someone who's consistently low in connectedness, the fact that they're responsive may kind of indicate that there's almost a heartbeat left to that relationship. So in this context, we might think of this as better than stable low, which might be just disconnected already, right? So we have to test that interaction term to address this. But fragility would be prognostic of a risk process developmentally. This is our competing hypotheses. Okay. So to address these questions, we turn to the Family Life Optimizing Wellbeing Study, which was conducted at Penn State. This is a sample of 151 caregivers and their 9th or 10th grade adolescent. We required them that they were in 2-parent households or 2 caregiver households because other research questions focused on couple relationships. We're not focusing on that here. 151 families. They completed a baseline survey, 1 caregiver and 1 adolescent. They then engaged in a 21-day daily diary protocol, and then we have a 12-month follow-up assessment for these risk outcomes. For the daily diary researchers, our compliance to daily surveys, parents on average gave us 97% of days, so about 20 out of 21 days they gave us their data. Adolescents were giving us just about 19 days, just over 90% compliance rate to the daily protocol. So really nice rates of compliance to work with. On a daily basis, we had parent reports of their use of positive behavior support. Here's a sample item, praised or complimented for good behavior. That maps right on. Connectedness was rated by the adolescent. How close and connected did you feel to your parent? And the beauty of these web-based surveys is that you can pipe in text. So if it's their stepmom or if it's their aunt, you pipe in the actual person that you're referring to. So it doesn't have to say like your mom or mom-like person, right? You can be very kind of connect to the life that they're living. And our global measures that were measured at baseline in 12 months, we had deviant peers, antisocial behavior, which I stole directly from PAL assessments, conduct problems using SDQ, and then past month frequency of drunkenness, cigarettes, and marijuana use. Oh, on the right is a screenshot of the daily survey that they got. This could have been completed on a smartphone very easily, a computer. If it was a tablet, or you could tap where you wanted the little slider to go. There's a blue dot. Ranged from 0 to 10, 0.1 increments. I don't know what a 9.2 would mean really, but if someone were so inclined, they could do that. It was pretty quick and easy to fill out. Definitely less than 5 minutes a night for our daily survey, which had quite a bit in it. Okay, so returning to research question 1 of this daily within family question, we applied multi-level models. And the full equation is up here. We nested the 21 days within the family. We accounted for time in case there was reactivity to the 21 days, like answering these questions every day. Sometimes you see systematic change, so we accounted for that. And then we also accounted for adolescent sex. And to do this, we disentangled the within and the between. So within family variation is a deviation from their average score. So if they're higher than their usual or lower than their usual, and that's really where the action is here. But you also have an average score, so we get our traditional between family kind of correlation or association. What I want you to focus on for this research question is right there in our PBS responsiveness, which will show up on the next screen. So in the black text, to answer question one, it's always anticlimactic, little table. What we found was indeed on days when, thank you, when parents used more PBS, adolescents felt more connected to their caregivers across this sample. So this is an average within family coefficient of this PBS responsiveness. So step one supported this idea of PBS responsiveness. To move to research question two, we extracted each family's score for PBS responsiveness by taking the random coefficient and adding it to the sample average. So everyone has their own, what would be a within family association for them, and now we can translate this into a between family space in a developmental model. So there you go. You add them together and you get between person differences in PBS responsiveness. And because we were concerned with the fragility possibility, we calculated individual averages of connectedness across the 21 days, and that becomes our moderator. Pretty cool. I got really excited about this. In our first analyses, we're just linear regression in 2 steps to test the moderation. The white text is a little maybe tricky to read, but we had our baseline outcome variable. We had PBS responsiveness, the average connectedness score, and then we had covariates, males, being adolescent sex, family income, and living with 2 biological parents. And then in the second step, we added the interaction between their PBS responsiveness and their average connectedness. As we look at these 3 outcomes for deviant peers, antisocial behavior, and conduct problems, a pattern emerged where in 2 cases there was a statistically significant interaction, and for antisocial behavior there was a main effect of PBS responsiveness predicting increases in antisocial behavior over time. So this appears to be consistent with a fragility perspective that these adolescents who felt more tentative maybe were exhibiting increases in antisocial behavior over time. As we explored those interactions, further support for this fragility perspective came in, or it was those that generally felt connected to their caregivers. If they had higher levels of PBS responsiveness, they were at elevated risk over time. However, in those that were particularly low in their average connectedness, responsiveness was negatively associated with these outcomes. So it kind of flips from risk to protective depending on the nature of their connection to their family. We repeated these for our substance use outcomes, and it was somewhat similar. We had 2 main effects. Again, a positive association between PBS responsiveness and increases in drunkenness, increases in marijuana use over the course of a year, and then we had another interaction in predicting cigarette use, which looks very similar. Again, high average connectedness families where adolescents had high rates of PBS responsiveness were at risk for increasing their use of cigarettes over time. Those that were low in connectedness, responsiveness as an individual difference variable was slightly protective relative to those that were just stable low connected, right? It's always relative. Okay. Kind of spoiled the conclusions, but first conclusion, positive behavior support does seem to encourage a sense of connection to one's caregivers. So it's really nice to see this in the 9th and 10th grade years. But long term, a high rate of responsiveness is concerning. So we found support for this fragility, particularly true for adolescents that had a strong relationship. Fragility might be an indicator that they're starting to pull away and they're looking to engage in other contexts and developing other relationships. They may make them vulnerable. In terms of implications for prevention, first is this really, this kind of circles back to the importance of connecting this daily timescale to developmental change. I believe this is an argument for the value of daily diary or intensive longitudinal methods for identifying risk processes. These findings to me are evidence that we would not identify these youth with fragility by using a single assessment of their connection to the caregivers. It was only by identifying that within family process that we would even know that there were people that may be at risk for disengaging from their family. So I think this calls for some enhancement to our family assessment approach. And also, we should learn more about how interventions address this. Maybe our interventions in terms of family management do reduce fragility, and we would learn more about intervention change processes. In the event they don't, this could be a way that we might have opportunity to enhance our impact of family-based interventions for people that could appear low risk at the surface, but are actually in the beginnings of disengaging and engaging in this deviant context. And 0 minutes and I'm done. All right. Thank you for your time and attention. Here's our paper will be coming out in the December issue of D&P.